Ah yes, Andor, the show nobody watched, even with its primary competition being the likes of She-Hulk and the Rings of Power. The utterly uninteresting origin story of a 1.5-bit Star Wars side character whose only claim to fame is dying just couldn't entice people to tune in, to the point where even the showrunner Tony Gilroy had to admit that he was chasing the audience. And this is both a little bit of a shame and a glorious retribution both at the same time. For as I have stated repeatedly on this channel, as has the aforementioned showrunner, Andor is not a Star Wars show, and that is precisely why Tony didn't get his expected massive audience, because that audience is there for Star Wars, not a Tony Gilroy heist slash spy slash rebellion slash prison break slash cop slash RNG plot generator masquerading as a television show. And that really is Andor in a nutshell right there. As the simple answer to the question of, but why aren't people watching, is because the only thing the show seems sure of is what it isn't. It isn't a Star Wars show, but it tries to be everything else. And despite this still being like a 10 to 11 hours long show, there is so little of everything else, because there is so many other things, that there is no meat, there is no substance to truly get invested in. Here, let me take you through our titular character's journey here, and you will soon see what I'm talking about. Our hero, Cassian Andor, is a scrappy rando from a backwater world looking for his sister, or more correctly, his utterly irrelevant plot point, as the sister is completely forgotten about by Andor, by the writers, and everyone else quicker than you forget about your last uneventful bowel movement. A couple of cop killings later, and Andor is recruited by Luthen Rael, who is incredibly impressed with the heist Andor apparently did off-screen. And Rael is willing to risk his ass in person as the leading organizer of the entire resistance, even suspecting that Andor might be a spy, because of Andor's apparently unique and ill-defined skill set, which is so desperately required for a heist movie. Ah yes, where Andor is introduced to a gaggle of sacrificial lambs, whose only role and personality is to have their carcasses be kicked unceremoniously from the altar of plot investment and Andor's character growth. As only the rebellion's pair of lesbian spies survive the incredibly poorly planned and executed heist to steal an entire imperial sector's payroll, which is kept in hard cash, guarded by 12 dudes in Space Ireland's version of the Hoover Dam. And the only backup this unbelievably rich and unprotected target has is a few World War II fighter planes disguised as TIE fighters. Oh, they look like TIE fighters, sure, but considering this...
How far is the airbase?
From the garrison.
50 clicks, you said.
52.
Fine, 52. They'll be on you in minutes.
9 minutes. We've timed it.
Which gives them a top speed of about 340 kilometers per hour. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they are World War II fighters, and slow ones at that. After the drudgery of watching our red shirts with AKs get massacred in perhaps the most predictable heist segment in entertainment history, Andor feels the need to kick back and relax a bit with his ill-earned gains, and travels to his home planet of Mexico, where he is immediately recognized as a brown person and swiftly arrested. No shit. A random shore trooper sees Andor walking and decides he's kinda sus. Thus, he has his droid hang him for a bit, and Hutt jury here sentences him to 6 years of hard prison labor for having an aggravatingly Mexican accent, I guess. Our sad and sorry excuse for a main character then spends a few days assembling focus panel links for the Death Star, because of course he does, and then flees the prison by flooding its toilets, alongside yet more expendable friends, most of whom die or disappear almost immediately. I particularly liked the part where Andor abandoned his primary and key co-conspirator because he couldn't swim, and Andor sure as hell wasn't going to help him. And then, finally, the series ends with Andor returning to his proper home this time and seeing a civilian uprising kicking off when the dead woman who kidnapped him as a child tells the people to get themselves massacred by stormtroopers because they have to fight these bastards, this Imperium, they're not visiting anymore, they're occupying us. Coincidentally forgetting that it was her adoptive son Andor's murder of a pair of corporate security officers that brought the Imperium to the planet in the first place. But hey, details. If the plot can't even remember the fact that Andor supposedly had a sister, I'm sure the violent murder of a couple security guards is equally forgettable. It is a mess, and the constant genre hopping is not doing the show any favours, and tragically, and this is the reason why it's a little bit sad, in the middle of all of the pointless Andor nonsense are the actually good parts. The spying and the political intrigue. Well, mostly the spying, really. Watching Mon Mothma complain about her marriage is hardly the most riveting entertainment, but the actual building of the resistance, the cloak and dagger of Luthen Rael's operations, and his ruthless quest to resist the Empire, that's some pretty good shit. It's just too bad there is so little of it, and it is constantly interrupted by Andor's face. And don't take this as an attack on Diego Luna, by the way. I'm sure he's a lovely guy, the actor, incidentally. But this should not have been an Andor show, because the Andor character is a near universal detriment to the series. It should have been a Luthen Rael show. It should have been a Cyril Khan show. As Andor, Cassian Andor, the supposed focus of the series, is just not very good. The prison part is way better than the heist, because I liked the prison design, and I liked the peek behind the curtain of the Empire, and getting a look at how they built the Death Star via a lot of slave labor, and how they designed this rather clever and incredibly secure prison complex, how they encouraged the prisoners to compete against one another to increase productivity. These were nice touches, and again, way better than the heist, but they both have the same fundamental problem, in that despite both being several episodes long, there is almost no substance to them. The core of a good heist and a prison break story is a nice and meaty and complicated plan, with tools and tunnels and safe-cracking and hard-to-breach security system requiring perfect coordination and teamwork. It requires, well, stuff to happen, for intricacies to be ongoing, whilst in Andor, the prisoners break out of the top secret security prison by setting off a water leak and bum-rushing the guards. There was no plan here beyond jam the elevator and kill the dudes in the security guard uniforms. A plan only possible, by the way, because the script stated that for reasons, the entire complex, despite making a crucial part for the Death Star, was severely underguarded. And the Imperium had just realized this and were now sending additional security personnel, apparently. Convenient, I do suppose. And due to reasons like this, Andor would have been a far better show with less Andor, or preferably with none of it. Now, Mon Mothma is mostly a miss too, but Stellan Skarsgård as Rael is fantastic, and probably my favourite character of them all is Cyril Khan, the ex-corporate security guard that legit did nothing wrong. Andor is a murderer, and that is all that Syril knows about him, and he is trying to catch the murderer. But since Andor is remarkably able and willing to commit violence, he murders the entire security strike team sent after him, and Syril is scapegoated for it. May I also point out the fact that Andor here casually wipes out an entire tax squad of specially trained officers as well. Just because he's Andor. There's no particular reason for it, it's because he has a movie to play in years down the line, which also, of course, sweeps the legs out from under the entire... Right, this is probably one of the main reasons why the Andor segments are so boring, because you know Andor's not going to die. He's not even going to be severely hurt or inconvenienced because he's gonna be in an upcoming movie where he's gonna die, and so there is zero danger surrounding him. It's just that the people around him die like flies, which if anything only enhances your disattachment to the character, as he's apparently some kind of wandering Grim Reaper that slays anyone who isn't a Luthen, Rael, or lesbian. But going back to Cyril Khan, he then has to move home to his shrewish but still kinda sorta well-meaning mother and starts a dead-end job at the Bureau of Standards. But even after having fallen as low as he can possibly get, he never gives up and tries continuously to redeem himself by catching Andor, who in many ways becomes his Mexican white whale. And the worst part is, Syril, the supposed bad guy in the show, has more of a hero's journey than Andor does. He struggles, he fails, and he picks himself up again, gets himself a friend that doesn't die immediately, unlike Andor, and even at the end, Syril saves the princess from a bunch of hooligans and does something useful to begin his redemption arc, in his point of view. Now, granted, the princess is a futuristic Gestapo officer, but, you know, close enough for government work, eh? And on the topic of the secret police as well, they too are one of the more interesting things in Andor. They have their own intrigue, and political bickering and backstabbing, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering, as they try to figure out the nature of this new rebellion. I mentioned this once before, but there is an absolutely delicious exchange during a security briefing, where two officers spar with one another using protocol and persuasion in a rare modern-day example of decent writing and, well, eloquent acting. It is simply a room full of intelligent people trying to outwit one another with a brilliant and well-articulated conversation. It is really cool. But this too is of course where the show fails to take Star Wars in a new direction. For whilst this is interesting, and remember that the reason why Andor was made, and made by this particular showrunner, was because Disney wanted to try and deal with the Star Wars fatigue, whilst also trying to recoup the massive loss the purchase of the franchise has been so far. And the solution was to make a Star Wars show with less Star Wars in it, and hey, that might have worked if the show had focused completely on the cat and mouse game between the Proto-Resistance and the Imperial Security Bureau. If it had done so, there was a chance of it to be good enough and still linked closely enough to an element of Star Wars to satisfy both audiences. The ones that wanted more Star Wars and the ones who wanted something different. As policing actions and undercover work is not normal Star Wars fare, but since it failed to deliver that, it didn't have enough of a hook on the good parts and instead gave you too much mediocre. It is not a success. Star Wars has tanked massively in the ratings, where frankly it should have soared, because again, the spying shit is good. If the first two episodes had been focused on Rael, I believe this would have been an incredibly popular show, but it didn't. And frankly, nobody really cares about Cassian Andor. He's not that interesting of a character. He doesn't have a particularly good journey. He doesn't have much of a hero's arc. His only real transition here is from hesitant thief to hesitant thief to hesitant thief to hesitant rebel. It's not much of an evolution, really. And since Andor, the show, can't make up its mind about what it wants to be, instead of one really solid storyline, we instead get 20% of a heist movie, 20% of a prison break, 20% of a spy movie, 20% of a cop show, and 20% of something that might resemble Star Wars if you squint at it a bit. which in turn leaves the fans of Star Wars, of course, feeling deeply unsatisfied, and leaves the fans of all of the other things deeply unsatisfied because their thing simply wasn't fleshed out enough. It is a brilliant example of trying to please everyone and thus failing to please anyone. Which leads me back to the conclusion I made at the beginning of the video, that it is both a bit of a shame and a retribution that Andor ended up as it did, because it is a shame, because frankly, some of the world building is actually really interesting. Looking at Coruscant, for example, looking at Mon Mothma's life as modern year as it is, like, oh, my husband don't understand me, oh, my daughter's a teenager, oh, woe is me. It's still nice to see Coruscant. It's nice to see the regular life of Syril. It is also really nice to see the Imperial army being used for once instead of the Stormtroopers, as the Stormtroopers should be a relatively rare elite force. Now, the problem is also that the show doesn't represent it that way. It shows you Imperial army, but they're just as shit as the Stormtroopers, as the Stormtroopers too are just as shit as the Imperial army guys, which misses the entire point of making a differential between the two. And again, Stellan Skarsgård's depiction of the rebel leader is really goddamn good. He's ruthless, he is cold, he knows he is creating a set of circumstances where people will be oppressed harder. He wants it. He wants the Imperium to overreact. He wants them to throw thousands of people in prisons for ridiculous sentences. He wants them to crack down and kill people. And he knows that that is what he wants, and he's willing to make that sacrifice, even as he practically straight up tortures his own double agents. He refuses to let them leave the game. He's a monster in his own right, but, well, starting a resistance is hard and requires a great deal of ruthlessness. At the same time, Cyril Khan is just a guy trying to do the best he can and trying to take pride in doing that thing. He's not acting out of malice. He's not hunting down Andor because he wants to crush the resistance or anything. He seems to quite genuinely believe that the Imperium is a good thing for him. And considering again that he is as low as he can possibly get, having to move in with his somewhat abusive mother over all of this, and finally he gets a chance to try and redeem himself, even getting a little bit of perhaps a love story arc in the midst of it, he's a way more interesting main character than Andor is. And there, of course, is the glorious retribution. Disney set out to make a TV show that wasn't a Star Wars show at all. They set out to make something completely different, and they did, but in so doing, they also covered the entire spectrum of genres without ever actually doing one of them well, or to a great enough degree to really drag in an audience. Interestingly enough, the people I have seen that have been absolutely fanatically positive about Andor are usually the people with quite a lot of political involvement in Andor, who view this as the glorious beginning of their revolution versus the evil Imperium. And that is, of course, also what the actors thought, as the show has been described as a takedown of Trump. Which might be another reason why it doesn't feel a whole lot like Star Wars, because the actors and the writers both had their heads stuck in 2022 instead of a galaxy far, far away. Now, Andor was greenlit for a second season before the first one even entered production, so there's gonna be a season 2, and it's gonna be watched by no one. And it's probably gonna be just as undirected a mess as this one, though, you know, put Andor in jail for a while longer, and this time just forget about him, and maybe there might still be some hope, though I very much so doubt it. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.